Welcome to a new crash course on our channel where we will learn how to create REST APIs, and we will also show how to deploy to a production environment thanks to a great platform called Hostinger, which are the sponsors of this video, and I'm going to talk about them in just a bit. So if you have a little bit background with programming, then you probably know how to create requests to different websites, and basically you heard about how you can automate reading things from different websites with Python. So today we are going to be on the server side of that, and we will create a REST API by ourselves, and we will use Django REST Framework in order to create a REST API. So if you have a little bit of background with Django as well, then that is going to help you out. So if you will enjoy in this video, be sure to hit the like button. And about Hostinger, I promise that I will talk about them a little bit. So that is an all-in-one solution for hosting websites. It gives you the complete package of buying domains and buying certificates and basically everything that is pretty much necessary for hosting a website successfully and securely. And right now they are having some great Black Friday deals that you should go ahead and check out. Hostinger offers an 84% discount during Black Friday for the premium shared hosting plan, which includes a free domain name, a free SSL certificate for allowing secure traffic, and also 100GB of SSD storage for storing data for your websites. Beyond that, you can apply a 10% discount by following the link hostinger.com/gym-shaped-coding in my description, and you can enjoy a complete web hosting package with this amazing deal. Okay, so we have a lot of things to cover in that crash course, so let's get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and install Django. We need to install this on our system interpreter so we can create a project out of its subcommands. So I'm going to go ahead and use pip, the package manager, and I'm going to install Django. Now be sure that you installed already Python and a ready ID that you work with, and also the pip package manager. Those are things that I assume that you already have on your system. Okay, so we are going to execute this one, and if we zoom out a bit, then we will be able to read the logs more carefully, and in about a few seconds Django should be installed. Okay, so if we go ahead and use Django-admin -version and we do not see any errors, then it means that we have done a great job. Okay, so now let's go ahead and clean our screen and work on our new project here. So we are going to go ahead and say Django-admin start project. Make sure that you don't have spaces, and then we are going to call this project let's buy, and that will be responsible to create some new directories and new files for us. As you can see, when I executed the dir command, then I see this directory. Now if we go inside of this, then we will really see what kind of files we have. So we have one more directory and our manage.py file, so that we will be able to start and stop our Django application. Okay, so right after I have done this, then this will be my current directory. Okay, I know that it is not displayed here in the left side, but I'm going to take in this directory and I'm going to open my PyCharm exactly on that directory, so we will be able to write the files in order to start developing our first API. So go ahead and open your PyCharm in this directory and we will continue from there. Okay, so after setting up the project, just to verify that we have done a great job, we can try to execute this application for a minute. And if we go to the URL here and we do not receive any errors, basically it means that we have done a good job. Okay, so now I'm going to get out by Ctrl+C or Ctrl break if it doesn't work for you. We are just going to now create some additional applications. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you have a minimal experience with Django, then you should be knowing what are applications inside Django. Basically, those are components that allows us to split our different behaviors of the website to more components. Now, by that fact, basically you could divide, for example, your authentication code versus your items code into different applications, and then it will allow you to have nicer organization of your code. Now in our case, we want to create two applications so that the first application will be all the products applications, all the things that are related to that, calculation of the prices and so on. And the other one is going to be the application dedicated for the REST framework, meaning that dedicated for the API endpoints that this application is going to have. So we are inside our current project, if you remember, and inside here we are just going to use this Django admin command again, and this time we are going to use start app, meaning start a new application, and the first name is going to be product, alright, and the other one is just going to be API. Okay, so this is going to be really helpful to divide the code in our entire project, and as you can see now in the pie chart, we already have those directories here, one here in above and the other one here. So now we are ready to go ahead and again execute the application and start working on that one. Alright, so now that we finished preparing everything about this Django project, let's get our hands dirty and start writing this project. Now, the first thing that you want to do probably in each Django project is to configure the urls.py of your project. The first thing that I'm going to do here is going to let's buy directory, which is the projects directory, and then inside the urls.py file, I'm going to import the other URLs that might arrive from other applications. And by applications, I mean the last two applications that we just created that we named product and API. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and say that I will use two more paths, and then I will use empty string for those, and then I will specify that I want to include the other URLs of other applications. So it will be as easy as going to that line and also use the include function from django.urls, and then I'm going to say that I want to include all the URLs that are coming from API.urls, like that. Now I also want to do the same thing for the product, right? So I'm going to use a comma, and then I'm going to use Control D to duplicate that line, and I'm going to say that this should be product.urls. Now, once I have done something like this, then it gives me the control of specifying my URLs inside the applications itself. So I can go ahead to the API directory here, and I can just create a new Python file, which should be named URLs. Okay, that's a critical point. And I'm just going to do the same for the product directory, right? So now we have two files here and here. And then here I will specify the URLs that I want to have in my applications separately. So let's go ahead and give it a try to see that we have done a great job. I'm going to go ahead and open my product.urls file, and then I'm just going to say that my URL patterns is going to be equal to an empty list. By the way, in the Django framework, there are going to be a lot of variables that needs to be named in a specific way. So be sure that you do not mismatch this URL patterns variable in here. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and create a URL inside here. And for that, we need to first import some of the functions that are coming from the framework. So it will be from Django.urls import path. And then we are going to also import the views from the product application, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and say from product import, and then if I use a control space, then you can see that I can start importing everything here. So I will import the views, which is the content from this file, which we will start work on that soon. And then I'm just going to go ahead and say that I would like to have a URL that is going to be accessible in /product, okay? And then I also need to specify the connection between a path to a view. View being a function that will handle what are the actions that we should do in the background before we visualize the page, right? So if we go ahead and say views.product_view, that's going to complain, of course, that this doesn't exist because we did not create a function with that name in the views.py file yet. So let's go back to here, and I would also give this a name. That's just for metadata reasons in each path, so I'm just going to do that. We will see the benefits of giving a name in the near future once we create API endpoints. And now I can go ahead and say def product view. This will receive in request like every view in Django, and then we will just go ahead and return an HTTP response, okay, and I will just say hello. Now this is something that needs to be imported, so I will go to the first line and I will just import that one. So now that we have done this, it's a great idea to see if our application is up and running, and you can see that we have some problems. Now if we take a look in the latest paragraph here, then you can definitely see that it complains about api.urls file. Now, if we break down this error here, then you can see that after pointing to my directory of urls.py, it says here does not appear to have any patterns inside it. So this really emphasizes the point that I mentioned earlier about how some of these special variables needs to be declared in a specific name. So this means that it complains about how this api.urls Python file does not have the URL patterns variable. So we need to create that. Okay, so if we go back to our project, then we can just go back to our api.urls file that you can see that it is empty, and we will just go ahead and use an empty list temporarily to get over this exception, right? So I will say URL patterns equals to an empty list, and we will leave it as it is. And if we go back to our terminal, then you can see that we got our website back. Now we also have this warning here that says how we don't need to add the / in the beginning, so that's also a good point that Django mentions to us. So we can go to the product.urls file and we can take this off, and we need to add the / here. So now if we go back to the terminal, then you can see that it doesn't complain about anything. So if we visit this website, then now we can see that the root location is not recognized. But if we go ahead and use / product, then you can see that we receive hello. Okay, so that's something that I really wanted to show in the beginning of this course, because from now on, when I create a view or a URL, I might do it faster than what I have done right now. And that's something that I really wanted to show in the beginning of this course. Maybe you saw similar examples of this in other Django courses. So I really hope that in general you understand how to create a view and the URL and basically all the lifecycle to allow access in different endpoints like we have done with the product /. So let's go ahead and see the further steps creating this API. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do here is to define the structure of the products data that we want to give our users of the API once they will try to access all the products that are available in this API. Now that is something that we need to understand that we should be doing with a database, okay? So in Django we have this built-in database for development that is called SQLite 3, and that is just a file within our project that you can see right here. Now the way that you can start creating different tables in a database when it comes to working with Django is of course by using the models.py file. The classes that you will define inside the models.py file will be represented at the end of the day as different tables in the SQLite 3 database. And it's a great idea to start working on a class that we could name product that later on will be shifted as a table in the database once we will apply some commands that we will see in the future. And those are going to be migration commands. Maybe you have done this in previous Django projects that you've developed. Okay, so let's zoom in this file and start creating our first model. So I'm inside product and the models file here, and I will start writing class product like that. This should be inheriting from models.model class. So Django could understand that it should be a table at the end of the day. Okay, so inside here, we will use a colon, and inside here I want to define a couple of fields that my table will have. And obviously it is a great idea to start with a name field. So we will go ahead and say that this should be a character field, okay, and we could give it a max length, and it is a common value to give it 255. So that's what I will do here. And additional fields that I will give it will be unique equals to true. And that is because I don't want to have same name for two products. Okay, so that's why unique equals true. We're going to handle the exceptions once someone will try to create a product with the name that's already existing. Okay, so the other field that I'd like to create here is the price field for each of our products. Now, I'd like to name this original price from the first place because in the future we might want to design some logic and functionality for discount and so on. So it might be a great idea to name this original price from that point of our project. So let's go ahead and give it a float field because we might have prices like, I don't know, 49.90, okay? So that's why float field is a great idea here. And there are going to be a couple of more fields that I'd like to have. As I mentioned earlier, let's go ahead and have a discount field, which will represent the amount of percentage, okay? So in that case, it might be tricky because when we want to represent a number that will be like percentage in the future, then we want to do this integer to avoid complexity, all right? And we also want to have some validators that this value will never be above 100 or below 0, okay? Because we are talking about percentage value here. So that's why we could go ahead and say that that's going to be an integer field and that's going to receive a couple of special fields. So if we go ahead and say that the default will be 0, that's going to be comfortable because, you know, when you go ahead and buy something in a store, then by default it's not going to have some discount, okay? So default value of 0 could be a good option here. And now that I have done this, then the next field that I will pass in here will be validators. And that's what I said earlier about validating this value, that it should be between 0 to 100, okay? So for that, we have special handlers in Django that will handle the validators of your integer fields. And for that, we need to import some additional modules to our file. So I will go ahead and import from django.core.validators import minimum value validator and also maximum value validator. And once I have those, then I can basically go ahead inside my list here and pass in two different elements inside that list. The first element will be minimum value validator, and since those are classes, then we should be creating an instance of those classes. Okay, so I will just open up and close parentheses, and you can see that in the tooltip it asks for limit underscore value. So minimum value validator should be 0 and the maximum value validator should be 100. Okay, so that's the way how you can basically limit the values of your integer fields. Alright, so that's fair enough for this product class. Let's see what we need to do now in the terminal in order to convert this to being a table in our database. Alright, so looking back here in the terminal, then you can see that Django was complaining about a specific thing from the very beginning of this course. Now, if we take a look in this message, it says that we have 18 unapplied migrations, and that basically means that Django expects from us to run python manage.py migrate in order to apply some changes to our database. Now, a migration in Django terms basically means a process of converting a class that is inheriting from a model into being a database table. And it says that it has 18 of those that are unapplied yet. So that means that we need to apply some changes to our database in order to have the built-in functionalities of Django, like the user authentication and like the permissions and so on. Those things are coming built-in Django, and we did not apply those changes into our database yet. So that's why before even thinking about the migration of the product model, we first need to apply the migrations that Django prepared for us by default from the very beginning. So let's go ahead and do that first. And as a follow-up, we will also apply our own module into a database, like we will do our own migration. Okay, so if we get out from this application with Ctrl C, then we can basically run python manage.py migrate like that. And you can also see in the running migration section that it doesn't even apply something related to the product application, right? Those are just built-in applications that is existing inside the Django project. Alright, so right after we applied all the default 18 migrations that were arriving from the Django project from the beginning, let's go ahead and also focus on the product model that we want to migrate as well. Now, in order to do that, we actually need to complete one more tiny change in our Django application. So that's why it is a great idea to go back to PyCharm, and we should be visiting the settings file inside the project directory. So it will be inside the let's_y, and then we should be visiting the settings.py file. Now, this file is very unique in each Django project because it basically declares some of the settings of the entire project. All right, like debug mode equals to true. So this configuration allows basically synchronously reload the application once the code is updated. Okay, so that's a good thing for development mode. And we also have one more critical list here inside the settings file that looks like install_apps. Now, those are basically different applications that are installed inside the project itself. Now, if you remember, we created two applications inside the entire Django project that were API and the product, but we did not add them to this installed apps list. And that is something that we should definitely do right now so that we will be able to use commands like migrate in order to migrate the changes that are inside the product application. So the convention to do that is to write the following thing in here. So we will add a new element to that list, and it will be, so let's start with the API application, api.appi config like that. And the reason that I'm writing this in that syntax, it is because if we take a look in the API directory, inside the apps file, that should be the reference in order to install an app, okay? It should be a reference to that file. And of course, this is a file that is generated by default once we created an application with the name of API. So that's why I used this exact reference, and this is going to be the same thing with the product, right? So if we go to the apps.py file inside the product, then we should be pointing to this class. So let's go ahead to our settings and say product.apps. And I will just paste in product config like that. And very important, do not forget to add here one more comma. And now basically those two applications are considered as installed applications, and that is good for us. Okay, so right after we have done that, let's go ahead to our terminal and prepare the migrations. So in order to do that, then I'm just going to say Python, and let's clean the screen first and zoom in a bit. So Python manage.py make migrations like that, and you can see that it prepares the migrations for our application, and it says to us that it is about to create the migration for the model of product. Now check out what will happen if I will just leave it as it is and I will execute our application with run server. You can see that it complains about one migration that we did not apply. Okay, so that is very similar to what we have seen before. Once we saw you have 18 of those. So now we have one migration that we need to apply. Okay, so that is why it is a perfect idea to get out of our application again and use manage.py migrate, so that we will basically apply the model into being a database table, and that is perfect. So now if we go ahead and again execute our application, then it will just run without any errors. But further than that, it also means that we can start creating persistent objects of products in our database. And that is something good because now we will start having some persistent data in order to later on represent them as JSON objects in our API. Okay, so the Django application is still up and running, and I'd like to create some new product objects that will be stored inside our database. Now, there are a couple of ways of doing that. You can use the administrative page to create objects after you register your modules, but you can also do creation of the objects by using the shell of Django. So let's go ahead and see how it is going to look like. So I'm going to go ahead inside the project directory, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and say python manage.py shell. And again, it is critical that the terminal is in the same directory as where the manage.py file is located, meaning the project directory. Okay, so you can see that now I am just inside a Python shell and I can execute some commands like I'm inside the project directory and create some products from the shell, and that is very useful. So let's go ahead and get started. So we need to first import the module itself. So it will be from product.modules import product like that. And if you remember, this is how we named our class inside this file. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And then I'm just going to go and say product.objects.create. Okay? And then I need to pass in the fields that are mandatory. Now, by saying mandatory, I basically mean that if you remember from the models.py file, we have some fields that are having default value. So this means that I can allow myself to dismiss those. So the only thing that I need to pass in will be name and original price. So if we go back to our terminal, then we could basically say name equals to, let's say, phone, and then the original underscore price could be equal to something like 349.9, like that, okay? And once we have done this, then you can see that it already says us that we have some objects. Now, if we also go ahead and try to access all the existing objects, then we should be seeing that. So if we say product.objects.all, and that's a method, then you can see that we receive back a query set that says that we have one object. Now you can see that the representation of this object basically uses the number of 1. Now that comes from a unique ID number that each object will also receive once you start creating an object. And that starts counting from 1, and that's why it shows you product object 1. And that's something that you can change by overriding the _str method. I mean magic method. Now, if you never heard about _str, basically I have a video that is dedicated about _str and also some more magic methods, and I'm going to link this up in the description if you want to watch. Okay, so I will go ahead and use def inside my product.modules and inside the class, and I will say _str . Alright, and I will use parentheses, and of course it completes with a self, and I will say that a good way to represent this would be by its name. Okay, so I can just go ahead and say self.name, and this should be enough to return a different representation of the object. Okay, so if we go back to the terminal and we actually exit from the shell like that and we launch it again, then I'm just going to run the same commands like before. So from product.modules import product, and then I can just say product.objects.all as a method, and you can see that we receive the actual name of the product, which might be more friendly than the unique identifying number, and that's a recommended step with each model that you create in Django. Okay, so it could be nice if we would have some more product objects in our website. Now, if you will visit the code snippets repository that I have, inside the Django REST Framework course directory, there is a Python file called create_products.py, which you can take from there 5 lines of code that you can just copy and paste in directly just to create some more products inside our database. And that's something that I'm just going to do right now. You can do this now or you can decide to skip it, but it is going to be more comfortable, especially for the purposes of the rest of the tutorial, to have more products. So I'm just going to paste those one by one, and I'm just going to create 5 more product objects. Okay, so here's the third one, and that's the fourth line, and for the last line it's a TV product, and that's it. So now if we go ahead and use again product.objects.all, then you can see that now we have a list of 6 products. Right, so our web application right now has some modules, we have some objects that we created, meaning a persistent data that we store. Now it is about time to start displaying this data in a REST API fashion. Okay, so that is why we want to take a look in the documentation to start preparing our Django project in order to apply the needs of the Django REST framework. So if we scroll down a bit in this documentation, you can find the link in the description, of course, then you can see that REST framework requires the following. Now, those are versions that are probably going to be updated by the time that you watch this video, as well as the Django versions. But I'm referring you guys to take a look in this documentation because it might be a little bit different by the time that you watch this course. Okay, so it also says that those Python packages are required. So those things are things that we should be taking in consideration. And also you can see that in the installation, it recommends to install those 3 packages at least, okay? Some of them are optional, but it might be a great idea just to install those. Now, we want to consider creating here a virtual environment so that we won't have a dependency collision if we will have other projects on our system in the future. And that's why creating a separated interpreter dedicated for this project is going to be a better idea. Now we can do this of course by using the virtual environment module of Python. If you don't know what I mean, then there's going to be a link to a short tutorial that you can take a look, which explains deeply what is a virtual environment and what are the needs and why do we really need them in each Python project. Okay, so I'm going to go to our terminal. Be sure to stop the application right now because we are going to change some of the files and folders. And okay, let's go. So now we are going to start by creating a virtual environment, and that's something that we can do by saying Python -m in order to use specific modules. Then I will use the venv module and I will name my virtual environment venv like that. So that's a command that might take a couple of seconds. Let's wait a bit. Okay, so now that we have done this, if we use dir to list the content, then you're gonna see this new directory created here. Now, if we clean everything and try to use a command like pip freeze, then we are still going to see a lot of packages that are installed in my system Python interpreter, and that's okay. This list is going to be looking different to you because you have different packages that you installed probably on the system's interpreter. But that's the exact case we look to avoid, right? So that is why we are just going to use the interpreter dedicated for this project. And we have now created a virtual environment, so it's going to be venv /scripts /activate. And I'm going to run this command to activate the usage of the current interpreter that I want to use. In Linux, this command is going to be looking like the following. Okay, so be sure to write this one instead of what I have wrote here. Okay, so you can see the change. Now we are using our virtual environment, and now if I say pip freeze, you can see that I do not receive anything back, and that is good. Now it might be a great idea to include all the dependencies of this project in a separated file. So I'm just going to put this on the right side, and I'm going to bring in our PyCharm, and I'm just going to create a new file that by convention people like to name it requirements.txt. So I'm just going to do that, and you can also see that PyCharm recognizes this file as a list of dependencies file, and I'm going to start by providing the Django with the version. So I'm going to scroll up in my terminal, and I'm just going to copy that one and paste this in as a first dependency. Now that's something that I'm doing because that is the version that we used to create this project from the very beginning. That's why I'm already including it in our dependencies. And I'm also going to now install 3 packages in our virtual environment. So I'm just going to clean everything. And if you remember, those packages were those 3, right? So Django REST Framework, Markdown, and Django-Filter. So I'm just going to copy and paste those and just run each one of them. So the first one is successful in a few seconds. Okay, so we installed that one. I'm just going to use pip install markdown as well. And I'm just going to use pip install Django-filter. Okay, so right after we have done this, then right now I'm going to take in pip freeze, and that will just list me all the packages that I have installed by installing those 3 packages, right? So you can see that it installed more than 3 because it probably included some other dependent packages. Oh, I just noticed that it also installed the Django 4.0.6 probably as a dependency package to the REST framework. So that's something that I didn't know that it will do. So we did not really need to add this one to our PyCharm from the beginning. So I'm just going to bring in our PyCharm and I'm just going to override it like that, okay? So those are going to be our requirements.txt file, and now we are going to use this interpreter in order to just launch our application. Right now, if we say python manage.py run server, then it is just going to use the interpreter of the virtual environment. So that is something that we definitely want each time that we launch our application. Okay, so in the PyCharm side, I'm going to ignore requirements and also ignore this extension. Now let's see the further steps in the documentation. So if we scroll down a bit, then you can see that it recommends to add the installed app REST_framework, and that is an action that we are already familiar because we learned before how to add installed apps in our settings.py file. So I'm just going to go ahead to our let's_by settings file, and I'm just going to go here and I'm just going to say REST_framework like that. Now check out what will happen as soon as I do this. You can see that the Django server tried to reload itself, and if we did not receive any errors by the Django server until now, it means that we have done a great job. Let's continue from here to more changes in our project. Alright, so now we installed the Django REST framework as part of our project. Now we want to see what are the benefits of using it. Now in the Django REST framework we have some special classes that knows to handle complex data and eases the process of just converting query set into a JSON data. Now we don't just talk about taking in all the products that we have and converting them to a JSON. There are much more deeper actions that you want to do when you host an API, like allowing to send a JSON data as a client, and then maybe it will take some changes inside the database. Maybe it will modify some of the products or apply discounts, for example, right? So in order to handle exactly those scenarios when it comes to building an API, the Django REST framework has a special class that is called a serializer. Serializer is just a type of class that abstracts your model, and it allows to handle complex data and eases the process of converting the data into JSON or XML or any other content types. Serializers also provide deserialization, meaning the exact opposite action of converting a JSON data into a query set, and of course it does the actions in both ways. So let's go ahead and see how we can use those in your project. Now I'm going to go ahead and inside our API application, I'm going to start a new file that we will name serializers like that. And that is just by convention because it is just comfortable to see that inside this file we have our serializers. So let's go ahead and see what we need to import in order to create a serializer for our product model. So I'm going to go ahead and say from REST underscore framework import serializers like that. And once we have done this, then we are going to go ahead and use a new class. Now this class is going to be named the following way by purpose. So our model name and then followed by serializer like that. And that's going to inherit from serializers dot module serializer like that. Now I know that it is a little bit complex, but this is basically a class that just again knows to handle all the JSON converting and stuff that is related to converting query sets into JSON data. So that's why we inherit from this class. And now that we inherit from this class, then we need to set a couple of class variables so that the model serializer will understand which module it should watch in order to start converting the data to JSON. So that is something that you do under a class that is called meta. So we are going to do here one more class, and that's going to be class meta. Again, those are naming conventions, so you want to keep the same naming convention. And then I'm going to say module equals to product. Now we need to import our module from our product application. So that's going to be quite easy. We are going to go ahead and say from product dot modules import product like that. Now that we specify the module, we can also specify what fields we want to include inside our serializer. Now currently we can actually go ahead and say that fields is equal to double underscore all double underscore, and that's something that you can do because that is beneficial instead of writing all the fields inside our models. So if we go to our model, instead of just specifying each of those one by one, and this also includes the ID that is generated automatically by Django. So instead of doing that, we can just say double underscore all double underscore, and that is just saving some time. Okay, so now that we finished with our product serializer, let's see what we can do with this class. Alright, so now we created our serializer. Let's go ahead and start presenting this data in a JSON style in one of our URLs, okay? So that's why I'm going to go ahead and start writing some code inside our views. So inside views, we are just going to create class-based views, and that means that we are going to use classes instead of views in order to generate data that will be sent to an endpoint being a URL. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete this from here, and I'm just going to go ahead and import a couple of more libraries in order to get started. So that's going to be, of course, the API.serializers import product serializer, and I'm just going to again import the product model. So product.models import product. And now from the REST framework, I am also going to import some more important functions and classes that will allow us to prepare our data. So from REST framework dot response import response like that. And then we are also going to go ahead and use class-based views. And for that, we need to inherit from a class that is built in inside the REST framework, okay? So we are going to go ahead and say from REST underscore framework dot views import API view like that. You can already see from the naming convention that this is going to be a class designed for API views, meaning just returning a JSON data, okay? So let's go ahead and create our first view. So class product view, which is going to inherit from API view. And inside here, what is so special with the API view class that we inherit from, it allows us to create method names just as the request methods that we have in all websites. So we are already familiar probably as a little bit experienced developers with Django that we have some request methods that are very famous, like the get method, which is only responsible for receiving data, or a post method. Post method usually the method that is used when you fill in forms in order to create a new user, etc. So we could just go ahead and create a method that we could name it get, which will handle all the get requests that will come to this view. And that's going to receive the request as a parameter, pretty similar to an isolated Django project. And now inside here, let's go ahead and deliver a basic serializer, which will be just a JSON fashion of all of our products. So we will use a variable name like query set, and this one will just include all of our products. And that's something that we know how to bring in. So product.objects.all. Now we could also include some more things to all of our objects. We could go ahead and use something like order underscore by, and we could order by a name because that's a field that we have. So let's go ahead and do that in order to show some more advanced things that you can do to your query sets. Okay, so now we have our query set, and now we also gonna need to initialize our serializer, which will handle everything that we need to handle in this get request. So we will name this variable serializer equals to product serializer like that, and we will pass in as an argument our query set. Now since this query set includes more than one product, then by default you need to pass in many equals to true in order to avoid errors in the future. Okay, so that is important. If you already know that you are going to have more than one object when you execute something like that. Okay, so basically the query set includes more than one data, and that's why many equals to true is critical. And then we are going to prepare a response. Okay, so we will return response, and this response is going to be just serializers dot data. And you can see how much things you can do with your serializers. You can refer to the fields, and you can see already an auto completion here. You can do much more things with the serializers that we will see in the future, but for now we will access the data property, which will prepare all the data in JSON. Okay, so now that we created our view, let's connect this view into a URL that we want to just open access to all of our clients that will access this API. So if we open our api.urls, then we actually don't have anything inside the URL patterns. Let's go ahead and split the panes here like that, so it will be easier to write the code here. And let's go ahead and import all the views. So we will say from API import views like that, and we will also say from Django.urls import path. That is the function that allows us to create different URLs within our application. Okay, so inside the URL patterns, we are just going to include a bunch of instances of this path. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, path, and then let's say that we want to allow access when people say products / like that, and that's going to receive a couple of more arguments. So we are going to deliver the view here. So here we are going to say views dot product view, and we're gonna need to provide a as underscore view function, because by default path will receive a reference to the functions which were delivered as views. But since we created a class as our view, then we need to say dot as underscore view like that. Okay, so now we also going to pass in a name to our path, and we can say just products underscore view, and this should be enough. Okay, let's go ahead and add here a comma so that we will not be confused for the next paths that we will add. Okay, so this should be enough. So now we should be going to our terminal and check if the website is up and running, and it is. So let's go ahead and access it. Okay, so you can see that we receive in the root page page not found. But if we say / products, then you can see that we start to receive some nice results. If we zoom in a bit, then you can see that we actually receive a JSON response that the products are inside an array, which each array includes an object, okay? And each object is just sorted by name. And why it is sorted by the name? Because inside our views we said order by name. If we remove that and go back to our page and refresh this, then you can see that it is going to be sorted by default by the ID. Now, one more thing that worth showing here, if we make this page a little bit bigger, then you can see that it shows you just more metadata about this request that has been made, like the response code and what are the allowed request methods, right? But you can actually make this to only display JSON, and that's it. Okay, if you press here on JSON, you can see that again you see just the same array of objects, but you only see the JSON response itself. Okay, so that's something that you may also want to know about how the Django REST framework works. Okay, so we were able to handle displaying all the products in our REST API, but we do not handle displaying a single product, and that's something that is handled in a lot of REST APIs that you will work with. The fact that you can just go ahead and specify some metadata that represents the next product, and you will just see the info about that product. So in most of the cases, it is handled with the identifying number. So if I should go to that URL, then we should be seeing the product that its ID equals to 1. And of course, we do not handle that yet in our backend, in our API. So let's go ahead and write the relevant code to handle that situation. And I'm going to open our PyCharm here, and we are just going to create a separated class that will just be a separated view. Now you should be seeing here that our class name is actually product view. Now it could have been a better idea of naming this to products view, and then obviously change that in our urls.py just as a reference here. And also the name is already products view, so I must misspell this one. And now we are really going to create a product view because we want to handle single product, and that handles obviously multiple products. Okay, so if we go ahead and use here a separated class, which will be a product view, and that is going to again use API view as its parent class. And then again, we are just going to override the get method to handle the get request. It will receive request as a parameter. And now our query set is going to be a little bit different here. We're gonna need to use query set equals to product.objects.get. Now the get method just knows how to retrieve a single object at one time. So that's why it is also going to receive a couple of arguments. Obviously, we want to pass in the info about the received identifying number. But we need to understand how we can pull the data that the client enters in the endpoint of the URL, right? So let's go ahead and see how you can handle that. If we open our urls.py in the right pane here, then we are also going to create a URL pattern from this class here, right? So if we go ahead and start preparing our path, then it should be handling the endpoint of product to represent a single product. But after that / it should be handling all the numbers between 1 to 6 in that current situation, because those are all our identifying numbers. So there is a convention of specifying the parameter that you want to handle inside those greater than and smaller than signs, what are also called as brackets sometimes. So between those, you can actually put a parameter name, and then it will know to proceed that as a parameter inside your view. Let's see how that's going to work. So I'm going to call this ID underscore arg like that, and then I'm just going to do the same steps like we did in the previous path. Okay, so it's going to be pointing to a view that we just created, views.productView.asView, and then its name is going to be product underscore view, like that. And I'm just going to add here one more comma. Okay, so now that we created this id underscore arg, then we are allowed to also receive the exact same parameter name as a parameter. So I'm just going to go ahead to our views.py, and I'm going to receive this as our parameter as well. And then we can basically go ahead and say that id equals to id underscore argument, like that. So what will end up happening? Our query set will know to get the product object that its ID is going to be equal to whatever number the client will provide in the URL. So that is a perfect situation for handling single product requests. Okay, so right after that we handle this, then the rest of the code is going to be quite similar to the previous view that we have created. So let's close this urls.py here to focus on that one, and I'm just going to go ahead and say that our serializer is going to be equal again to a product serializer, and I'm just going to pass in query set. Now pay attention how I do not pass many equals to true, because it should be a single object, and then I'm going to return response serializer dot data, like that. Okay, so now that we have prepared this, let's test this out. Okay, I'm going to go to our browser, and I'm going to refresh our products, which now you can see that it changed to products because we changed that class name before. Now I'm going to take off the s, and I'm just going to go ahead and say 1, and you can see how it handles perfectly single product objects. I can go ahead and do all the numbers here. Obviously if I do a 7, then you can see that I receive product matching query does not exist. Now that is not the perfect result that you can display to your clients, and that might be confusing what I'm seeing here, but if you actually go ahead to your project and you take a look inside your Django project, not the REST framework application itself, not the API package, but actually the let's underscore by dot settings py file, then you take a look here in the debug equals to true. That is the reason that you actually see this response, and you can also see that this really shows a lot more information about your code and so on. Now, considering a situation that you deploy something like this on production, obviously you will turn debug equals to false, like that. And if you do something like this and you refresh this out, actually I have to check that our application is up and running, and you can see that it complains you must set settings allowed host if debug is false. So let's go ahead and do what the Django engine wants. So I'm just going to go ahead and add here and just something that will represent all the hosts. So go ahead and use allowed underscore host equals to an array, and then just an asterisk inside a string. So now that we have done this, then I'm just going to get out of our application, and I'm just going to run that again. Okay, so now you can see that our application is up and running, and you can actually see what will your client see if they will just provide an ID number that does not exist. So besides doing that, we can actually prepare again a JSON response that will only say this product does not exist. It will be much nicer to see when you are a client that works with a REST API, alright? So if we go back to our project again, obviously I'm going to use Ctrl-Z a couple of times to change back our settings. And I'm going to double check that our application is again up and running. Perfect. So now I can allow myself to close that settings.py file, and we can go back to our views.py to work on preparing a response if the ID does not exist. So first things first, I like to prepare a new instance method that will handle just retrieving the object if the provided ID really exists, and if not, we will prepare some separated logic for that. So that's why it is a good idea to separate these inside a new instance method just like that, and obviously it will receive self by default, and I'd also like to receive id underscore argument like before. Now here I'm going to try to use try and except blocks to handle if something will go wrong. like we really saw before. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy the exact line, query set equals to product.objects.get id equals to id underscore arg. And then if nothing goes wrong here, I'd like to return the query set. Now, temporarily, I will also use my except block and I will do nothing if something will go wrong. Okay, so that's how this single product method is currently written, and I'm just not going to change anything, and, and I'm not really going to call this method from here yet, but I will display you again what will happen if I refresh this out. So you can see that if we zoom in here, then it says exception type does not exist, and that comes from the product module. And that means that besides using an except block that will handle all the exceptions in the world, we could only handle an exception that raises the exception of does not exist, which is obviously a best practice. Okay, so if we go back to our PyCharm again, then we should be handling a situation that says product dot does not exist, like that. And I know that it might not show you an auto completion for this, but that exception really comes from inside the product class because it inherits from models.model. So that is the convention writing that. Okay, so if that is the raised exception, then we are really going to pass, mean that we will not return anything, and then we will handle the logic inside our get method. So now let's change our get method a bit. So now, besides using objects.getId equals to arg again, I'm just going to say that our query set is going to be equal to self.singleProduct, and I will just pass in id underscore argument like that. Okay, so now that we have this, then we need to check if this method returns something or not. Because you can see that if nothing goes wrong, then we return the query set, but if it does not exist, we actually pass. And that is equivalent to just saying return none. Okay, we could choose one of the two and just do that, and you can just pick up one of the two because it will just do the same for you. Let's use return none to improve the readability here. Alright, so now I can go ahead and say underneath here, if query set, meaning that if query set returns something, then we could start preparing a regular response. Okay, so let's check if we have done a great job until now. If we go here and try to access URL 2, then you can see that I can really see something. But if that is not the case, then I want to prepare a separated response. And then I will also write a new comment here that will say handle response for IDs that are not and that is not for an ID that is not an existing product, like that. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and say, so we will use the return response again. Now, if you can remember, the response receives at least one argument that is by default a dictionary. So serializers.data is obviously a dictionary that is represented as JSON at the end, alright? So what we could do here, we could actually give a dictionary that will look like the following. We can say that we have a special message that we want to display to our clients. So we can say MSG, for example, equals to product with the ID, and then we will refer to our ID number. So we will use a formatted string, and then we will just say ID underscore argument does not exist, like that. Okay, so if we do something like this, let's see the behavior of that. If we go to our website, then we could refresh for 2, and that is the expected result. But if we go ahead and say 7, then you can see that we receive product with the ID 7 does not exist. And that is a perfect result. Okay, that is something that you want to do in your REST APIs. Now, one more thing that I will change here. A lot of clients also like to see a different response code in that case to really indicate that the request was wrong, that the client prepared the request wrong. So that is why it is also not a best practice returning an HTTP 200 response code. 200 is a response code that indicates that everything went well and smoothly and as expected, but that is not the case. So that is why we could go to our PyCharm and we could return a different response code. Let's see how we can do that. So first of all, we could take this space from here, which was a little bit unnecessary in my opinion. And then we could go ahead and pass in a different argument. And that will be just the response code. So it will be a library that we need to double check that we import that. So inside the REST framework, there is a status submodule that we need to import. So from REST underscore framework, import status like the following. And then we could actually go ahead and return status dot, and you can see that I can choose a lot of response codes. I know that it is not quite readable, so let me jump a line here like that, and then we could read this drop down again. Okay, so 200 underscore OK is obviously the default that is prepared, but you can see that there is also HTTP underscore 400 bad request. That is a perfect indication that the client will understand that the request was just bad. Okay, so that's why I can just return that response code, and if I go ahead and refresh this, then you can see how it returns 400 bad requests. That is an important best practice that you always want to keep implementing when you develop REST APIs. Okay, so until now we were able to develop all the functionalities in order to retrieve the data in different versions, meaning that we created views that supports to retrieve a single product in the given ID like we did just a couple of minutes ago, and we also supported retrieving all the products. And what is common in those two is that we only retrieve the data as a client who perform a request, right? But right now we also want to extend this Django REST Framework application so that we will also support creating a product. So that means that we need to change our HTTP method from get method to a different method, and that means that we are going to extend this application by writing a code that will handle post requests. And that means that we can come up with a new method in this products view class, and then we can write a code that will handle the post request for us. And if you remember, this was the get method that handles this products view. All right, so whenever we perform a get request to that URL, which is this URL products / then we retrieve back all the products. But right now let's write a code that will handle the post request. So it is going to be as easy as using the post as the method name by purpose, and then we are going to also accept the request as a parameter here. And then let's write the code down below which will handle creating a new data for us. So before we complex things up here in the post method, let's go ahead and ensure that we differentiate between a get method to a post method. So in order to do that, I'm just going to create here a print line, and that will be visualized in our terminal where we launch the application, and we will write something like you are making a post request like that. Alright, and let's just return a random response, right? Because whenever we write a method, we always need to return some response, otherwise the application will crash. So I'm just going to go ahead and say return response, and then we can just create a dummy dictionary here that will say post true, and that is meaningless. That doesn't have anything that means something. That is just for debugging reasons, so that we really know that we create a post request. Now the question is how we are going to ensure that we create a get method request or a post method request. So I'm going to open up our browser here, and if we refresh this out, and we actually need to access products now, right? So this is a get method because we are using the Chrome browser as our tool to retrieve data, and this is the reason why browsers are made for. It is always made for performing a get request, right? You can see that while I refresh this, it performs a get request, and that is visualized in here. But actually, if we scroll down a bit, then you can see that here in this box I can use some content and then perform a post request. So that means that from here, if we perform a post request, then it will mean something different to our application. And I'm going to test this out by locating this window on the left side, and then I'm going to bring in our console, which will be just the logs of our application. And as you can see, the latest logs are basically the get methods. So right now I'm just going to send some data that is empty, okay? And by the way, that data that you send to the application should be just a JSON data, okay? And don't confuse it with the dictionary that we wrote as a response. That is just a response that is expected. This is quite different. Right now we are adding some data to the request that we prepare. So let's go ahead and write here some JSON, okay? And that is going to be something like that. Let's say that request 1, okay? Just a random data. And when I click on post, then you can see that I receive here, you are making a post request, and in addition, our response from the server, meaning the Django REST Framework application, is the exact dictionary that we wrote as a response in our PyCharm, which translated, of course, into being a JSON response, okay? Because that is pretty similar like what we did in the GET request just before. Alright, so now that we understood this, then we need to take this one step forward by really attaching the necessary data to our post request, and then also configure our method here so that it will know to handle to really create a new product. So at the end of the day, we need to know what is the required data that we need to send as a client so that the server will know to create a new product. So in order to see this, then I'm going to take a look here in our product.models file, because inside here we have the information about our required fields. So if we zoom in a bit and take a look here, you can see that the name is one of the required fields and also the original price. Now this is a float field and this is a char field, so meaning that it could be a string, and discount is a field that is an integer field, but you can see that it is not required because we wrote here default equals to 0. So this means that even if a client makes a request that includes the name and the original price, that should be enough. So now I can go to our browser and access to the products page in here, and I can start preparing some data that will be useful in order to create the new product. And I'm just going to come up with a new JSON here that we can start preparing, and that's going to include the following keys. So I'm just going to structure here our JSON data. So we will have key value, and I'm going to just copy that and paste this in, and I'm going to remove the comma here like that. So our first key, and pay attention that I'm inside the label quotes, is going to be a name, and then the second one is, and its value, excuse me, is going to be equal to something like, let's say, wireless mouse, like that, and the original underscore price, and that's actually a float field, so we can allow ourselves to, of course, remove the label quotes. And I'm just going to make up here a number like 124.90, like that. Now, I don't want to click on the post button yet because we need to know how we can read the received data from the request in our server side. So that means that I'm going to, again, locate those windows side by side, and I'm going to locate the PyCharm here. And if we go back to our views file inside the API directory, then I can just go ahead and start preparing some new code inside our post method. So I can delete this print line, and again, just for debugging reasons, I'm going to go ahead and use print, and I'm just going to print in request.data. The request.data basically prints the data that is arrived from the request. Now, one quick tip in here, in order to not writing this JSON over and over again, just put this in a different file so that you will know to always copy and paste this, because we are going to perform the same post request a lot of times until we really create a new product. So that means that just copy this somewhere and put it in just a random text file, okay? And I'm just going to do that. New file, temp.txt, and just paste this in like that. Okay, so now that we have this, then I'm going to click on the post button and see what happens. And if we open our console, then you can see that we really see the data that comes from the request, which is perfect. And that means that now we have the necessary information in order to manipulate this data and create an actual new product on our REST framework application. Now, I also want to take your attention to one more small thing in here. If we go back to our PyCharm and use the same code but only print the type of this request.data, and I'm just going to paste in the same content. So going to my temp.txt file, copy and paste this in and post this, then you can see that in the console the type is already a dictionary. And that is something wonderful that the REST framework does in the background. It takes the JSON and already loads it as a dictionary. And that just means that you don't have to put an extra effort parsing the JSON data that comes from the request. Because when you access the request.data, then it is already going to be as a dictionary data. So this is nice. And remember that in the background, it tries to parse JSON back to a Python dictionary. So this means that you have a responsibility to always provide a correct format JSON, because if you mismatch something, then the REST framework is probably going to complain about a bad request error because the JSON is not structured well. Okay, so let's prepare the code that will be responsible to really create a product. So this means that we are going to delete everything from the post method and just write the code here from scratch. So the first thing that we want to do now is to call the serializer and pass it the data that comes from the request. And that's something that we can start preparing in the following way. So we are going to use a new variable. We can call this serializer, and that's going to be equal to product serializer like that. Now I'm just going to pass in here data is equal to request.data. And this should be enough in order to say to the serializer that we have a new piece of data that out from that we want to create just a new product. So the way that this is going to work is by the following way. So after preparing the serializer object, then there is a convention calling the method that will go ahead and check if the serializer is valid. Now the way that this is going to work is by saying if serializer dot is underscore, and you can already see an autocompletion for the method. So it says that you should call this method before really go ahead and do some changes. That is a convention that you must follow in order to create the product object successfully and really write a new object to the database. So if this entire thing here returns true, then we can go ahead and say that we'd like to save the changes inside our database. And that's going to be doable by saying serializer.save. And right after saving the product to our database, then we can start preparing the response. Now pay attention that I'm still doing this if the serializer is valid. So we are going to say here return response, and then I'm just going to give the same data of the object that was created as my response, because that is a known best practice when you create an object with a request that you made. Just return the same data about the object that has been created. So the way that we can do this is by accessing the data inside the serializer, because the serializer does its magic inside and then it gives you the whole object as a dictionary inside this data property. So that's why I can allow myself to directly access it the way it is. Okay, so now we can also decide a different status code. Now there is actually a different status code that you want to display when you create a new object, and that is the 201 status code. So this means that I'm going to go ahead and use here the following status code which will be again something like the following: status dot, and you can see the auto completion of all the options. And I'm just going to double click on this http underscore 201 underscore created. Okay, so now that we have this, then let's check out if we have done everything correctly. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this on the right side, and then I'm just going to bring in our browser here, and I'm going to refresh our products page. Now, don't get confused, we're just going to perform a GET request. Okay, so all the products are here, and now let's see what will happen if we try to create a new product. So again, I'm going to go to my temp.txt file, copy this and paste this in, and I'm going to perform a post request. And you can see that we receive HTTP 201 created, and we receive the entire object as a JSON. And that is very valuable because you can really see everything about the new created data now. The ID is 7, of course, because the latest ID of the latest product was 6, so it got incremented by 1. And discount equals to 0 because we never specified the value for the discount, and it has a default value of 0. So this really means that we have done everything correctly. Now I want to start mismatching things here a bit so you can see what will happen now if the data is not valid. So going to our views.py, if we remember, then we have this serializer.isValid method that gets executed before saving the changes and before preparing the response. Now basically, is_valid does some special things that are quite unique, like checking if the given keys and values are valid, etc. Of course, you can extend the product serializer class by writing more validations, but it already does some of the validations by default for you. So let's go ahead and try to create a post request that by purpose we will just screw it up. So we will not provide the name, for example, okay? We will just say that something's price is that price here. So if we post this, then you can definitely see that something went wrong when we provided this request. Now you can also see in the exception that it says expected a response to be returned from the view but received a class non-type. Now this definitely means that no one returned a response after a request is arrived. But that might be weird because we already return a response if the serializer is valid. But the case is the serializer is not valid, so that's why we fail with that exception. We never wrote a code that handles the request if the serializer is not valid. So what that means? It means that we should go back to PyCharm and write some code under the else block in the if statement that we started to prepare. Alright, so back to our PyCharm here. So here is the location that we want to start our else block and basically handle the case that the serializer is not valid. This means that we should probably return a different response rather than HTTP 201 created, of course. So the way that this is going to work is by the following way. So we are going to prepare a new response if the serializer is not valid, and we also want to display the actual error in a nice and friendly way to our clients. Obviously, we don't want to display this yellow page because it also reveals the code of the project. But that's a totally different topic about the debugging configuration of this Django project. Anyway, we need to prepare a friendly response to our clients so that we will get rid from the exception we saw before. So there is a convention that the REST framework saves its exceptions inside a separated property, and I can access it with the following way. I can just say serializer.errors as the data that I want to return, okay? And now that I have done this, then I also want to have control in the status code that I want to return back. So this means that I'm just going to say that the request was bad. And we are already familiar with this one. It is just going to be http://400_bad_request. So now, and right after we have done this, let's check in the browser if we have done a great job. Okay, so back to our browser. Now I'm going to scroll down to the post request area, and I'm just going to paste in the same data, but again I'm going to scale this up by taking the name, and that's it. So now if I click on the post method, then you can see how beautiful things look now. You can see that we have a friendly exception that says that the name is a field that is required. So we can totally understand from that what we need to do now, because we see name, this field is required, so this means that we have to provide a name. And that is just the beauty of working with the serializer classes. It already does so much things in the background for you to ease the process of creating a friendly REST API for your clients. Okay, so right now we are inside the H panel of Hostinger. And the H panel is just a dashboard that shows you the services that you have and how many of them. For example, for the VPS, I have one VPS server that I can click and manage it. VPS stands for a virtual private server, basically just a server on the cloud. And you can see that I also have a domain name that I purchased from this website, which is named jscdrftutorial.me. And that's pretty much it. You can see the services that I have here. You can also see that by the time that I record this video, you still have the Black Friday deal available. Okay, so now let's go to our VPS and gather the information that we need in order to connect to that server. So if we click in here, then you can see that we have information like the public IP address, and on the top right in this panel we have the command that we need to use in order to connect to that server. So we will use secure shell, meaning SSH, and then led by the name of the user, which will be root of course, and followed by the IP address where the @ sign separates between them. So if we take this and paste this to our terminal and provide the password, then we will log in to the server. Okay, so right now we are logged in to the server. Now let me say an important warning here. I am not going to cover the security steps that are required to really deploy a web application successfully. Those things are a little bit more advanced things that I prefer to not touch here, but I will use a short checklist of things that I really recommend doing before you go ahead and host a web application to real people, which has a real intention to serve different clients. So like I said, I won't cover the security steps, but here is a short checklist of things that I will do before deploying a web application in security wise. So first things first, use a separated user that is not a root user. Disable logging in directly with the root user. That's something that you can do within the configuration files inside the etc directory. And from the Django perspective, use something that is called gunicorn, which I also cover in my Flask deployment tutorial. That is just a dedicated WSGI server that is really made for production purposes. Do not include the secret key inside the code. Use it as a separated environment variable, which your code will read from that. And also, do not deploy a server with a debug mode turned to true. Just make sure to turn it to false, and then this will make sure that your clients will not see your exceptions. Okay, so this is my short checklist. Of course, the security world is pretty huge, and the more things that you do to secure your server, the less the chances that a hacker will steal your information. So that is an important warning from me. Okay, so right now we are looking inside a Git repository, which includes all the code that we wrote in the tutorial, and we need to publish our code to a public location so we can use things like git clone to clone the code from the project and to really run it in a different location, like the different VPS that we are logged in right now. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to go ahead and use the command in order to clone this application. And I'm just going to use git clone with the HTTPS version. We are not really going to commit any changes to this repository, so using HTTPS should be fine. And that's why I'm going to take it and go here, and let's see where we are right now. So we are in our home directory of the root user. But like I said, I'm just going to do the steps to deploy an application quickly, not going to go any advanced things like using a separated user. So I will allow myself to directly say here git clone, and then just paste in the repository URL, and that will be responsible to deploy the code to the current directory. Now, if you have any exceptions here, like the command not recognized, something like that, then you probably need to install Git by saying apt install Git like that. But if you don't have any errors and you see that you have the directory, then it means that we have done a good job. So now I'm going to go ahead and change directory to let's buy, and let's take the next actions here. Alright, so let's go ahead and start running this application. Now, first of all, we need to install the requirements in a virtual environment. And if we use a cat and use the file of the requirements.txt, then we will see the content of it. And if you remember, we used the requirements.txt file to provide what packages we need in order to run the Django REST Framework application. So those are the list of things. So let's go ahead and create a quick virtual environment here. So I'm just going to go ahead and say python-m using the VNV module, and the name of the VNV will be VNV. So, excuse me, it should be Python 3, okay? And if we do that, then it will create a virtual environment for us. And once this is done, then we can activate the virtual environment by using the source command, and we need to relate to VNV bin and then to the activate like that. So you can see that it uses the VNV here in the beginning of my terminal line. So this means that we are inside the virtual environment that we have just created. Okay, so now we need to go ahead and use pip install -r requirements.txt, and this will make sure to go ahead and install all the packages that are listed in the requirements.txt file. Now, once we installed all the packages, then we are ready to run the application. But the way that we are going to run the application is not by just saying python manage.py run server. We need to do something so that this process will run in the background so we can continue doing our work. And there is a nice trick that you can do in order to run the processes in the background, and you just add this sign, and then this will mean that this process will run in the background. But the disadvantage of this is that the second that you log out from the server, then the process will terminate as well. So this means that if you have clients that are using this server, hypothetically, then all the connections will get killed, right? Because you logged in from your server, and this will mean that your Django application closed, so the website is no longer accessible. So in order to overcome that one, then we have a nice command in Linux that is called no hangup, and a shortened way to say this is no hup, something like that. But no hop basically is a command that allows you to run processes in the background, but the processes will not get terminated if you just log out from your server. And that's something that you definitely want. Okay, so if we enter here, then you will see that we have a process created with this ID, and the logs basically of the no hup command will be written in this file, and we will see this just in a bit. And right now, if we say jobs-l, then you will see that it shows us that we have one job that is running in the background that is basically coming from this command. So this is good. Now, if we want to terminate this process one day, then we will just go ahead and use the kill command followed by this ID. But of course, we don't want to do that for now, so let's leave this as it is. Now, once we run this thing in the background, then this means that in the scope of this server only, the application should be accessible with the port 8000, because if you remember, the default port that the Django application uses is 8000. So this means that if I go ahead and use the curl command to try to read a web page with just a Linux command, and I will say localhost followed by 8000, then we will see something about Django, but that is only showing the HTML content of the file, of course, and that's why you see this large amount of data. But this still means that we have done a great job, because we don't see something like no connection or something like that. We basically see HTML content that we receive back. So this means that there is a real Django application that is accessible from this port. And not sure if you see this, but it also shows you what are the URLs that you can provide in to see some of the pages. So this means that the Django application is running. But our goal is to actually going ahead and run this web application in port 80. This means that we will just provide HTTP, our server name, and we will access this website. And in order to do that, we are going to use a reverse proxy. A reverse proxy is basically something that you use in all your websites because those are the real tools that are made in order to launch websites. You can control a lot of things and improve the performance of your websites by using things like Apache or Nginx or stuff that are in the category of reverse proxies. So what we are going to do now, we are basically going to install Nginx, and this will mean that we will turn this server into being an HTTP server by using Nginx, and all the connections that are coming to the Nginx will be forwarded to the Django application, and this way we will complete the entire setup. Okay, so the next command that I'm going to execute is basically how to install Nginx. So we can run apt install Nginx like that. Now I'm not using sudo because I am already on my root user, like I said in the beginning of this deployment part, so I can just run it as it is. And if you don't see any exceptions here, then it means you have done a great job. For myself, I see Nginx is already the newest version because I already have Nginx installed, and some Linux servers are already coming with Nginx by default. And that's why I see that message. Now you can also go ahead and execute systemctl is-active nginx to double check that the service is really running in the background. If by any chance you receive inactive after running this command, then maybe you want to execute systemctl enable nginx for making sure that the service will start, and it will also start in each reboot. Okay, so this command might be the thing that you want to execute if you receive inactive after running this command. Now, one thing that I really like to do in that stage is to go ahead and use our web browser and see if just accessing the public IP of our server will be responsible to basically show a message that we installed Nginx successfully. So I can just take a new browser and put the public IP address without providing any port, and I would receive this result. And as you can see, I'm trying to access the public IP address that I'm using, and it shows me welcome to Nginx. So this means that I'm doing a great job until now because we have a web server that is accessible without providing any port. And when you do not provide any port, basically you access port 80, which is HTTP. And one more security layer warning here. Using a certificate will allow to pass the HTTP traffic securely by using HTTPS with the SSL protocol, which will use a different port. And that's also one more thing that of course I would recommend before deploying a web application that real users will use. So if we go to our terminal, then let's see the next steps that we need to do here. It is not enough that we have Nginx installed that is working. We need to configure the Nginx so all the traffic that is arriving to port 80 will be redirected to our Django application, and this way we will complete everything. So the way that you can configure some things is by going ahead and accessing the directory where Nginx is installed. And if we go ahead to etc and then the Nginx directory, here are some interesting list of files and folders that you can see. Now, if we visit the conf.d file, basically those are a list of Nginx configurations that you can keep here, and you can activate them so those will be really used. And there is a great way to set up default configurations for your Nginx, and that will be by creating a default.conf file. So I will go ahead and use the touch command to create this file, and it will be default.conf by purpose. Be sure to name this file the way it is, and then we are just going to edit that. Now you can use nano, you can use vi, and you can use vim. I'm going to use vim because that's the best editor, and we are also going to have a tutorial on that in the near future that will be published. So if we go ahead and use vim default.conf, then I'm just going to paste here some configuration that I already prepared in my code snippets repository. So that is the code snippets repository, and inside the Django REST Framework course, then you will see the default.conf file, and here's the information. So we are going to just copy that and we are going to paste this inside the default .conf file that we created. Now you can see that we just opened a server block, and that is a syntax that is unique to the Nginx, so it's okay if you don't understand anything in the first look. So you can see that we just open a server block, and we basically say that all the traffic that comes to the root location of the server, will be redirected to the localhost colon 8000. So this means that it will be redirected to the Django application. Now you can also see that we have a placeholder here for our public IP. Now, when you will use a real server with a real public IP address, the expectation is that you will replace your public IP address with this string. So this means that I will delete this one and I will just put my public IP address. And once I have done this, then I'm going to click on, and then I'm going to press on escape colon WQ exclamation mark, and then click and then press enter. So this is how you quit from Vim. I said that I will have a dedicated tutorial on that, so if that was confusing, it's okay. It's just a very nice editor that you can use in Linux to edit files, and it has some powerful features that allows you to edit files very quickly. Okay, so this will be the way that you can save a file. If we read the content of the file, then you can see that we really see the information that we edited. Okay, so this should be enough. Now the only thing that we need to do is to reload the Nginx service. So this means that I can go ahead and clean the screen, and I can just say systemctl reload Nginx. And this should be responsible to make the Django application accessible from the public IP address. So if we go to a web browser and we put our public IP, then you can see that our Django application is accessible. Now it's nice that our application is running, but we forgot to execute python manage.py migrate command so that our models will be migrated into database tables. And that is going to be quite easy. We are going to just go back to our terminal and we will just change to our home location by typing in cd. And then if you remember, we named the project let's buy. So here we can just go ahead and say python 3, or Python is enough because we are inside the virtual environment, python manage.py migrate, and it will migrate the tables. So if we go ahead and visit a page like /products, then we will not receive any errors, and this means our API is available. Now you can also go to the admin page and create a super user to control the API from here. Basically anything that you are familiar with the Django and the Django REST Framework that you know or we covered in the tutorial is available now, because this website is available to everyone and for you. So by saying everyone, again, be careful, we did not provide all the security things, and that's the way that you can deploy a Django application successfully. Okay, so we are back in the dashboard. So now I'm going to visit the domain services. Now you can see that I already own a domain that is called jscdrftutorial.me. So I'm going to click on manage, and I'm just going to configure a record that will be responsible to map the jscdrftutorial.me to an IP address that is public, and the public IP address that this is going to be recorded against, of course, is the public IP address of our server, so that this name will be accessible within the browser in the future. So if we go ahead and click on DNS name servers, then we just need to provide here a DNS record that will be responsible to map the domain to a public IP address. Now I'm not going to go into too much details how DNS records works, but basically Hostinger prepared you a kind of a record that will be responsible to take your domain name and point it to a public IP address. And if you just go ahead and use those configurations and just modify this points to box, and you just provide the IP address, then it should do the job for you. Meaning that if you add this record, then it is just going to go ahead and make sure that whenever you access the domain name, jscdrftutorial.me within your browser, then it is just going to show you the same result like accessing from the IP address. Now this is step one. That is something that you really need to do in order to make the domain name work and just map it to your server. Okay, so from the server side, meaning from the VPS side, there is one more thing that you need to do in order to make everything work successfully, and that is taking an additional change in the Nginx default configuration file. You need to go ahead and add one more server name, and the other server name will be, of course, the domain name that you want to allow access to the entire world. So this means that you should go ahead and edit the default.conf file inside the etc nginx conf.d directory. And if you remember, we already modified this file and we injected that configuration being a default configuration of the nginx. So we are just going to go ahead and edit this again. So it will be etc nginx conf.d, and then the name of the file is default.conf. So if we go here and we use insert and we just add one more name like jsc drf tutorial.me, then it should be okay. Now you can also decide that you don't want to allow access from the IP address, so this will be the single server name of this entire Nginx. So you know what, let's go ahead and do that. Let's disable the access from the IP address and only allow the server name that we own, which is the domain name that we own, so we can use it, right? So again, I'm going to press escape:\wq exclamation mark to get out from the vim, and I'm just going to repeat the same command but with cat, and that will make sure that we saved our changes. And I'm just going to reload, so systemctl reload nginx, and it should be nginx like that. Okay, so no errors in the reload. So right now we have a few expectations. First expectation, the IP address should not take anyone to anybody, so the browser just shows something like a site not found. And if we visit the website with the DNS name, then it should be a success response. So first things first, let's see what will happen if we refresh this page, and you can see that I receive nothing. So this means that we have done a great job. This basically shows you a 404, so you don't allow access to your website with the IP address, which is nice. But if you go ahead and say jscdrf tutorial.me, then it really takes you to the website. So this means that we have done a good job. If we just go ahead and say /products, then it shows you the products, which is good. So I'm going to be honest with you, there is also a stronger way to disable the access from the IP address so that it will not even show you the Nginx exception, but I'm not going to work on that. We have done a great job mapping the DNS name to the Django web application that we execute, which was the goal from the beginning. And Hostinger has some very nice services that allows you to just buy easily domain names and also buy easily VPSs, meaning your own virtual private servers, so that you can connect between them and you can host real websites using real domain names. Alright, so I hope you learned something new from this entire course. We covered a lot of things about how to create APIs with Python and deployment. Don't forget the security tips that I talked about throughout this course if you really want to serve an API to real users. And that will be it. Hit the like button if you enjoyed in this video, and also consider subscribing to my channel, and I will see you in the next tutorial.